Good evening and welcome to a presentation of Sefer Publishing Group and Sefer Academy. I'm Dr. Stephen Pidgeon. We're going to be dealing with tonight the apocalypse of Moses. All these curses shall come upon you and overtake you. Thus shall you say to the house of Yaakov, and tell the children of Yasharel, ye have seen what I did unto the Mitzrayim, and how I bore you on eagle's wings, and brought you unto myself. Now therefore, if ye will obey my voice indeed, and guard my covenant, then ye shall be a peculiar treasure unto me above all people, for all the earth is mine, and ye shall be unto me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. Shemot, Exodus 19:5. Thus says Yahuah Sebaod, the Elohai of Yasharel, put your ascending smoke offerings unto your sacrifices and eat flesh. For I spoke not unto your fathers, nor commanded them in the day that I brought them out of the land of Mitzrayim, concerning ascending smoke offerings or sacrifices. But this thing commanded I them, saying, obey my voice, and I will be your Elohim, and ye shall be my people. And walk ye in all the ways that I have commanded you, that it may be well unto you. Yirmiyahu, Jeremiah 7:21-23. Now we begin with the discussion of the blessings and the cursings given to us by Moshe in the book Devarim, Deuteronomy, chapter 28. The blessings. And it shall come to pass, if you shall hearken diligently unto the voice of Yahuah Elohaykem, to guard and to do all of his commandments, which I command you this day, that Yahuah Elohaykem will set you on high above all nations of the earth, and all these blessings shall come on you and overtake you, if you shall hearken unto the voice of Yahuah Elohaykem. Blessed shall ye be in the city, and blessed shall ye be in the field. Blessed shall be the fruit of your body, and the fruit of your ground, and the fruit of your cattle, and the increase of your kine, and the flocks of your sheep. 28:1-4. Blessed shall be your basket and your store. Blessed shall ye be when you come in, and blessed shall ye be when you go out. Yahuah shall cause your enemies that rise up against you to be smitten before your face. They shall come out against you one way and flee before you 7 ways. And Yahuah shall command the blessing upon you in your storehouses and in all that you set your hand unto. And he shall bless you in the land which Yahuah Elohaykem gives you. Yahuah shall establish you a holy people unto himself, as he has sworn 7 oaths unto you, if you shall guard the commandments of Yahuah Elohaykem and walk in his ways. 28:5-9. And all people of the earth shall see that you are called by the name of Yahuah, and they shall be afraid of you. And Yahuah shall make you plenteous in goods, in the fruit of your body, and in the fruit of your cattle, and in the fruit of your ground, in the land which Yahuah swore 7 oaths unto your fathers to give to you. Yahuah shall open unto you his good treasure, the heavens, to give the rain unto your land in his season, and to bless at all the work of your hand. And you shall lend unto many nations, and you shall not borrow. And Yahuah shall make you the head and not the tail. And you shall be above only, and you shall not be beneath, if that you hearken unto the commandments of Yahuah Elohaykem, which I command you this day, to guard and to do them. And you shall not go aside from any of the words which I command you this day, to the right hand or to the left, to go after other Elohim to serve them. 28 verses 13 and 14. But it shall come to pass, if you will not hearken unto the voice of Yahuah Elohaykem, to guard to do all his commandments and his statutes, which I command you this day, that all these curses shall come upon you and overtake you. Cursed shall ye be in the city, and cursed shall ye be in the field. Cursed shall be your basket and your store. Cursed shall be the fruit of your body and the fruit of your land, the increase of your kind and the flocks of your sheep. Cursed shall ye be when you come in, and cursed shall ye be when you go out. Yahuah shall send upon you cursing, vexation, rebuke, in all that you set your hand unto for to do, until ye be destroyed, and until you perish quickly, because of the wickedness of your doings, whereby you have forsaken me. Yahuah shall make the pestilence cleave unto you, until he has consumed you from off the land, whether ye go to possess it. Yahuah shall smite you with a consumption, and with a fever, and with inflammation, and with an extreme burning, and with the sword, and with blasting, and with mildew. And they shall pursue you until you perish. And your heaven that is over your head shall be brass, and the earth under you shall be iron. Yahuah shall make the rain of your land powder and dust. From heaven it shall come down upon you until ye be destroyed. Yahuah shall cause you to be smitten before your enemies. You shall go out one way against them and flee 7 ways before them, and shall be removed into all the kingdoms of the earth. And your carcass shall be meat unto all the fowls of the air, and unto the beasts of the earth, and no man shall fray them away. Yahuah will smite you with the botch of Mitzrayim, and with the tumors, and with the scab, and with the itch, whereof you cannot be healed. Yahuah shall smite you with madness, and with blindness, and with astonishment of heart. And you shall grope at noonday, as the blind gropes in darkness. You shall not prosper in your ways, and you shall be only oppressed and spoiled evermore, and no man shall save you. You shall betroth a woman, and another man shall lie with her. You shall build a house, and you shall not dwell therein. You shall plant a vineyard, shall not gather the grapes. Your ox shall be slain before your eyes, and you shall not eat thereof. and your ass shall be violently taken away from before your face, and shall not be restored to you. Your sheep shall be given unto your enemies, and you shall have no one to rescue them. Your sons and your daughters shall be given unto another people, and your eyes shall look and fail with longing for them all the day long. And there shall be no might in your hand. The fruit of your land and all your labors shall a nation which you know not eat up, and you shall be only oppressed and crushed always, so that you shall be mad for the sight of your eyes which you shall see. Yahuah shall smite you in the knees and in the legs with a sore botch that cannot be healed from the sole of your foot unto the top of your head. Yahuah shall bring you and your king, which you shall have set over you, unto a nation which neither you nor your fathers have known. And there shall you serve other Elohim, wood and stone. And you shall become an astonishment, a proverb, and a byword among all the nations, whither Yahuah shall lead you. 28:32-37. You shall carry much seed out into the field, and shall gather but little in, for the locusts shall consume it. You shall plant vineyards and dress them, but shall neither drink of the wine nor gather the grapes, for the worms shall eat them. You shall have olive trees throughout all of your coasts, but you shall not anoint yourself with the oil, for your olives shall cast his fruit. You shall beget sons and daughters, but you shall not enjoy them, for they shall go into captivity. All your trees and fruit of your land shall the locusts consume. The stranger that is within you shall get up above you very high, and you shall come down very low. He shall lend to you, and you shall not lend to him. He shall be the head, you shall be the tail. Moreover, all of these curses shall come upon you and shall pursue you and overtake you till you be destroyed, because you hearkened not unto the voice of Yahuah Elohaykem to guard his commandments and his statutes, which he commanded you. And they shall be upon you for a sign and for a wonder, and upon your seed forever, because you served not Yahuah Elohaykem with joyfulness and with gladness of heart for the abundance of all things. Therefore shall ye serve your enemies, which Yahuah shall send against you, in hunger and in thirst and in nakedness and in want of all things. And he shall put a yoke of iron upon your neck until he has destroyed you. Yahuah shall bring a nation against you from afar, from the end of the earth, as swift as the eagle flies, a nation whose tongue you shall not understand, a nation of fierce countenance, which shall not regard the person of the old, nor show favor to the young. And he shall eat the fruit of your cattle and the fruit of your land, until ye be destroyed, which also shall not leave you either grain, wine, or oil, or the increase of your kind, or flocks of your sheep, until he has destroyed you. And he shall besiege you in all your gates, until your high and fenced walls come down, wherein you trusted throughout all your land. He shall besiege you in all your gates throughout all your land, which Yahuah Elohaykem has given you. And ye shall eat the fruit of your own body, the flesh of your sons and of your daughters, which Yahuah Elohaykem has given you in the siege and in the straitness wherewith your enemies shall distress you. So that the man that is tender among you and very delicate, his eyes shall be evil toward his brother and toward the woman of his bosom and toward the remnant of his children, which he shall leave, so that he will not give to any of them of the flesh of his children, whom he shall eat, because he has nothing left him in the siege and in the straitness wherewith your enemies shall distress you in all your gates. The tender and delicate woman among you, which would not adventure to set the sole of her foot upon the ground for delicateness and tenderness, her eyes shall be evil toward the man of her bosom, and toward her son, and toward her daughter, and toward her young one that comes out from between her feet, and toward her children which she shall bear, for she shall eat them for want of all things secretly in the siege and straitness, wherewith your enemy shall distress you in your gates. If you will not guard to do all the words of this Torah that are written in this Sefer, that you may fear this glorious and fearful name, Et Yahuah Elohaykem, then Yahuah will make your plagues wonderful, and the plagues of your seed, even great plagues, and long continuance, and sore sicknesses, and of long continuance. Moreover, he will bring upon you all the diseases of Mitzrayim, which you were afraid of, and they shall cleave unto you. Also, every sickness and every plague, which is not written in the Sefer of this Torah, them will Yahuah bring upon you until ye be destroyed. And ye shall be left few in number, whereas ye were as the stars of heaven for a multitude, because you would not obey the voice of Yahuah Elohaykem. And it shall come to pass that as Yahuah rejoiced over you to do you good and to multiply you, so Yahuah will rejoice over you to destroy you and to bring you to naught. And ye shall be plucked from off the land, whether you go to possess it. And Yahuah shall scatter you among all people, from the one end of the earth even unto the other. And there you shall serve other Elohim, which neither you nor your fathers have known, even Elohim of wood and stone. And among these nations shall you find no ease, neither shall the sole of your foot have rest. Yahuah shall give you there a trembling heart, and a failing of eyes, and sorrow of mind, and your life shall hang in doubt before you, and you shall fear day and night, and you shall have no assurance of your life. In the morning you shall say, would to Elohim it was evening, and at evening you shall say, would to Elohim it were morning. For the fear of your heart, wherewith you shall fear, and for the sight of your eyes, which you shall see. And Yahuah shall bring you unto Mitzrayim again with ships, by the way whereof I spoke unto you. You shall see it no more again. And there ye shall be sold unto your enemies for bondmen and for bondwomen, and no man shall buy you. And thus concludes our reading of the Apocalypse of Moshe, chapter 28, the book of Devarim. So if there are questions, please post your questions now, and we will begin to take questions on this topic. And remember, post your questions in capital letters so I can see it. And that way it will be easier for me to know what the questions are. For some people, I know some have had trouble posting questions on the chat. And I apologize if I don't get to your question in advance. I would like to take your question. Right. So if you have questions, please post those questions now. All right, let me see what we have here. Okay. My thoughts on the Moses scroll by Ross K. Nichols. You know, Richard, I don't know. Richard asks what my thoughts are on the Moses scroll by Ross Nichols. You know, I don't know that work, Richard. Not quite familiar with it. What do I know about it? Nothing. So what's my opinion of it? Don't have one. Glenn Diven asks, does this speak of today? Well, there's two issues here. One is that this apocalypse is directed to the house of Yasharel. Now, the house of Yasharel, after the diaspora, is not the house of Yasharel that you would expect. In other words, it is really not dependent upon bloodline. And instead, it is dependent upon the words of your mouth that creates your status in Yasharel. This is a very important thing. And now the question you have to ask yourself in your own heart is, am I part of Yasharel? Well, here's how it reads. I think this is an important part. This is from Galatim or Galatians chapter 3. And I think this is an accurate and true summary. For ye are all the children of Elohim by faith in Mashiach Yahushua. For as many of you as have been baptized into Mashiach have put on Mashiach, then there is neither Yehudi nor Yavani, there is neither bond nor free, there is neither male nor female, for ye are all one in Yahushua HaMashiach. And if you belong to Mashiach, then are ye Abraham's seed and heirs according to the promise. And heirs according to the promise. So one has to ask themselves, are you baptized in Mashiach? If you are, then you are heirs according to the promise, and you are directly confronted with this prophecy. As it is true that blessings come upon you if you hear the voice of Yah and obey it. People say, well, that can't possibly be right because the New Testament doesn't tell us anything about that. Well, actually, let's take a listen in Matthew 28. And Yahshua came and spoke unto them, saying, all power is given unto me in heaven and in earth. Go ye therefore and teach all nations, teaching them to guard all things whatsoever I have commanded you. Teaching them to guard all things whatsoever I have commanded you. And lo, I am with you always, even unto the end of the age. Well, what things did he teach them? Well, in Mark chapter 12, we see a scribe coming to them and saying, having heard people reasoning with Mashiach and perceiving that he had answered them well, said, what is the first commandment of all? And he said unto them, the first of all commandments is Shema Yasharel, Yahuah Elohaykem, Yahuah Echad, U'ahavta et Yahuah Elohaykem, ve'kol levavka, ve'kol nefeshka, v'kol moedka, u'ahavta et re'aka ki'amok. And you shall love Yahuah Elohaykem with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind and with all your strength. This is the first commandment, and the second is like it, namely this: you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There is no other commandment greater than these. Well, people say to themselves, well, we realize that. That's why we have love for all people. And therefore, we love all people by caring for them. Therefore, we've met this commandment. However, in 1 John or Yochanan Rishon, chapter 5, it is written, whosoever believes Yahushua HaMashiach is born of Elohim, and everyone that loves him that begat, loves him also that is begotten of him. By this we know that we love the children of Elohim, when we love Elohim and guard his commandments. For this is the love of Elohim, that we guard his commandments, and his commandments are not grievous. So we see here that when we're talking about, does this speak of today, which is the question here, it does very much speak of today. And we can already see many of these prophecies taking place in the Western world. Now, I will go into it just a little bit, but the tip of the spear of all things Western, in other words, if we're looking for the model state that is supposed to happen in the Western world, according to the teaching of the World Economic Forum, according to the teaching of the New World Order, according to the teaching of the United Nations, according to the teaching of Agenda 2030, according to the doctrines of climate change, well, the nation that is leading is Ukraine. Ukraine developed a digital currency, a digital ID, a vaccine, a digital ID, vaccine-based, social credit score, social credit system predicated upon your digital ID and your vaccine status in a society that became conspicuously secular and began to completely divorce itself from the faith and the tenets of the faith in order to follow the tenets of software protocol and application protocol. In other words, they were guided by a social credit system, not by the tenets of Yahuah. They were guided by the commands of men, not by the tenets of Yahuah. They began to worship different Elohim, namely AI Elohim, rather than Yahuah. And as a result, what has happened in Ukraine is what will happen to the rest of the West. They have become a debtor. They are not a creditor. They have no money at all, and they owe the rest of the world billions of dollars. Their land has been overtaken by foreigners. The crops that they planted, they did not eat. The vineyards that they dressed, they did not take of the grape or make wine. Instead, these are taken by other people. Their lands are being vanquished. They are no longer the head, they are the tail. They are now being pushed into slavery. Their men and their women are pushed out as refugees into foreign countries to act as bondmen and bondwomen, yet no one will buy them. No one will take up the bond. And as it stands right now, they're enjoying a certain amount of privileges in some countries, like Britain and in other countries, but in other places like Poland, they have been sequestered in concentration camps. So this is the truth, that at the head of the spear, at the point of the spear, Ukraine, this cursing is already well underway. But this cursing is also well underway in the United States. It's well underway in Canada. It's well underway in Britain. The United States used to be the head. It is no longer the head. The United States used to be a creditor nation. It's now the largest debtor nation in the world. The United States, like Britain, like France, like Germany, is being overtaken by people from other nations who have now advanced to headship in those nations. For instance, in Britain, which was the seat of Protestant Christendom, we now have a Hindu that operates as the prime minister And the Prime Minister of Scotland is now a Muslim. Not to give the Hindus or Muslims any grief, but they are not British people in terms of the long tradition of being either English, Scottish, Welsh, or Irish. They are from foreign lands, worshiping foreign Elohim, and they are now the head, and the people who live in those countries are now the tail. The assertion that's being made in France right now is that France should be divided. Half of the northern part of France should be a Muslim state. This will also come to Germany as well. And so we see here that these curses that have been given to us here in Deuteronomy 28 are in fact upon us. Okay. And so Euphrasia says, is America being judged? America is very much under judgment. And the judgment that is upon America, this is not an argument that's taking place. Gee, should we get involved in a nuclear war? There's no discussion about that. It's like you can't go out and listen to, the news media taking a poll saying, how many people think we should get into a nuclear war with Russia? There's no poll to that because there's no debate to that effect. We're going to go into a nuclear war with Russia because it's not subject to debate. It is something that is definitely going to happen to America because America is not in control of its destiny. Nuclear war on American soil is judgment on America, just as is the economic crash that's coming to America, also judgment on America. The fact that America is currently being overwhelmed by immigrants over the border. Now, I'm not opposed to immigration, but immigration under a proper nation state is to be orderly and is to be recognized. In other words, if you apply a law that says anyone from Western Europe before they can enter the United States must prove that they're vaccinated, why would you open the gates at Mexico and say you can all cross the border without a vaccine? Doesn't it make sense if you were going to fly to America that you would not fly to New York or Boston or Washington, D.C. or something like this, but rather fly to Mexico City and drive up and cross the border since there's no vaccine protocol being imposed there? Well, of course it does. And we've had literally millions of people this year cross that border and begin to assert themselves in various cities where they are living in a form of luxury while Americans are living in tents on the streets of the United States. Okay. And Jessica says that our nation is deserving of the chastisement from Yah. His hands have been outstretched and his patience has been abundant, yet we have turned our backs to his mercy. And this passage here, Moshe says that he rejoiced to do us good and to provide us with abundance. And we ignored that. Don't tell us what to do. We're moving away. We're going to take our own way. We're going to ignore your protocols, and we're going to develop the protocols of people who like to molest children. We're going to develop the protocols of people who spend time in satanic rituals. We're going to develop the protocols of people who want to marry the same sex person who may be disguising themselves as the opposite sex. We're going to take their protocols. We're going to take their gods. We're going to take their political leadership, and we're going to exalt them and lift them into positions of authority over us, that they might take from us the tenets of truth that were associated with the Sefer of Yahuah and the teaching of the Torah, and give us their idea of what is good and lawful and inclusive and loving and fair. Not that it's lawful, but that it's imposed as a particular ideology. And so this is what we have done. All right. Okay, so this is, hold on, let's see here. Right. The elect are so from the beginning, and Yahshua said that none can come unless you have been given unto him by Yahuah. And this is Dirt Deborah 62:62 telling us this is John chapter 6. Yeah, this is true, right? Commandments are freedom to love Yahuah and each other. This is the truth, Judy, and thank you for making that remark. This is the truth. It is the freedom to love Yahuah, and it is the foundation of all freedom. One person asks, is Canada also under judgment? Canada is probably third in line. You have Ukraine that is really at the pinnacle of judgment, and that is going to be followed by the UK, which is second in judgment, and then Canada, which is third in judgment. Although Canada is competing with Australia now as to see who can embrace wickedness the fastest. Canada is being led by World Economic Forum minion Justin Trudeau, and his top advisor is the daughter of a Nazi, Chrystia Freeland, and she is imposing the tenets of National Socialism and Nazism on Canada, pagan Nazism. And that's what's happening. And the fact that pagan Nazism is coming to Canada has to do with the fact that the Canadians did not rise up when the Human Rights Foundation was created, the Human Rights tribunals were created in Canada to protect the rights of the LGBT community while doing nothing to protect the Christian faith, such that you couldn't say anything public that damaged or offended any person in the LGBT community. But the CBC could ridicule Christianity every night on television with no problem. And that went on for 20 years. And now all the tenets of the faith are being taken away. All aspects of freedom are being taken away. A digital ID is coming after your prime minister mandated the vaccine for all Canadians. Claims he didn't do it. He did. And now they are mandating a digital currency. They're mandating digital controls. You're going to adopt the exact same policies that were adopted by Ukraine, and you're going to see the exact same result. You're going to build houses and not live in them. Ask the Canadians who live in Vancouver, who've lost most of the infrastructure that they built to Chinese immigrants. That's what's going to happen to the rest of Canada. You're going to lose your homes to immigrants. You're going to be overrun by foreign powers. The crops that you plant are going to be eaten by others, and you're going to be speaking under a language you do not know. Okay, let's see. 26 days since Chucky claimed himself the Messiah of the church. Yes, and we know that KC3 took an oath claiming that he was the defender of the faith, and then added other Elohim, the defender of the faiths, with a plural. And so he's interested. He's injected a polytheocracy into the very heart of Protestant Christendom, and this is going to destroy the nation theologically and from every possible place, because he has allowed multiple viruses into the soul of the nation. Okay, so Will Bentoncourt says, has anyone else noticed a lot of Russians where they live? Because around my area, New Jersey, there's been a large uptick in Russian people here. I know from their lux and their language. Well, here's a couple of things, Will. It may not be Russians that you're seeing, but rather Ukrainians, because you have to remember about half of Ukraine has left Ukraine. About half the country has left. And they've left because the nation is being absolutely totaled. And the nation is being totaled as a result of the United States and NATO launching a war campaign with the intent of. Now, I used to think that the NATO war in Ukraine was primarily an event designed to attack and weaken Russia in order to get their hands on the natural resources of Russia. But now I understand that that's not the case at all. What is going on in Ukraine is the exploitation of Ukraine. Ukraine is to be weakened, to be destroyed, and to be divided. And Ukraine is the point of all this destruction is ultimately to destroy Ukraine, kill off most of the fighting men in Ukraine and all the Ukrainian nationals in this war, and then take the agricultural land for international corporations, take the natural gas and oil reserves for international corporations, and exploit whatever infrastructure remains there to engage in offshore human trafficking, organ trafficking, sex trafficking, drug trafficking, arms trafficking, and even bioweapons trafficking. And this was the idea, to create complete chaos and destruction and to bring judgment into Ukraine so severe that nothing would remain. So much of what you see, well, in your area is probably not Russians, but more likely Ukrainians. Now, it's very difficult for a person who does not speak Russian to be able to distinguish between the Ukrainian language and the Russian language, but they are different. They're different languages. The Ukrainian language is closer to the Czech language or to the Polish language than it is to the Russian language, okay? But when you hear it, you're going to hear terms like spasiba, and maybe zdravstvuyte, and some other words that are common in Ukrainian and also common in Russian. But the Ukrainians, most assuredly, can tell the difference between Ukraini yazyk and Pruski yazyk, because they can tell the difference in accents, and they know that Russian speakers who speak Russian only, there are many words in the Ukrainian language that Russians cannot pronounce. And similarly speaking, there are words in the Russian language that the Ukrainians cannot pronounce. And so they come with an accent. So it was one practice that was being exercised by Azov, or Right Sector, or Svobodna, which were Nazi paramilitary organizations in Ukraine before they were adopted by the government as full-scale battalions under the Ukrainian army. They would confront Russian speakers and say this word, let me hear you say this. And if they spoke it with a bad accent or couldn't pronounce the certain vowels and consonant combinations that were common to Ukrainian speakers, they would be persecuted, they would be beaten, they would have their houses burned, they would have their businesses burned, they would be caught and mugged and, dropped off for dead at a landfill. All of these things would take place. So when you're seeing a lot of people coming into New Jersey, the chances are very high that what you're seeing there is actually Ukrainian people. However, but if you are seeing Russians, there may be Russians coming in, but as far as I know, the Russians do not have a methodology of placing Russian operatives inside of the United States. That's not to say the Chinese don't. The Chinese most assuredly are placing an army of people. And you have to remember that the Chinese, to give you an example, we talked about this, Scott Bennett and I talked about this yesterday. The Chinese did something, the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, after they captured Hong Kong, they had a commitment, a 50-year commitment to allow autonomy in Hong Kong, which they promptly breached. And part of the way they breached it was by taking communist Chinese that lived in the mainland and moving them by the millions into Hong Kong. You have to remember, when you're talking a nation that has 1.2 billion people, it's very easy to move 3, 4, 5 million people into a region, which they did, and then say, hey, let's vote. Now that there's 5 million of us here, hey, let's vote. There was discussion in China about the idea of putting 50 million people in 1 year into South Africa. 50 million Chinese, building 25 2 million person cities in South Africa. And suddenly, and then once that was accomplished, saying, let's vote. Now that we're here, let's have a vote and see what kind of government we should have and who our leaders should be, using the democratic principles of majority rule, right? Well, so you can see that the Chinese have a methodology of warfare using principles of Sun Tzu that are a lot different than let's bomb your city and move in with an army. Far easier for them to do what they have done in Vancouver, British Columbia, and other places, what they're currently doing in San Francisco, LA, Seattle, and Portland, is to buy up real estate, because they have a lot of money. All the money that the US corporations used to have, Chinese corporations have. And they have a lot of money and are capable of buying a green card or buying even citizenship. But you can buy a green card with a singular investment of $850,000. So if you invest $850,000 in the US, then you get a green card on the spot. So as a consequence, housing in particular areas that was worth 150 to 200,000 suddenly were being sold at 850,000 and were being snapped up. Well, eventually, when you buy up all the apartment buildings and you buy up the ports in the major cities and you buy up the downtown area and you buy up all the luxury buildings, then it comes a point where you move in, and you move in with a lot of people. And so once you move into, for instance, if you moved into California with 20 million Chinese that just suddenly showed up and said, we live here now, let's take a vote and let's see who the new governor is. You see, all of a sudden, this is how you overtake the area. And I do believe that you're going to see most of the Western United States under Chinese control in the very near future. And they won't have to do it via military means. They're going to do it via immigration. And our current presidency is wide open to that idea. Wide open. Okay. So Dirt Dabber 662 says, will we see this pretty soon? And I think the answer is yes, we will see it. We're going to see it very soon. I think this stuff is coming upon us, right? So now we see here, for instance, Chadwick Canuck says Canada pays and compensates farmers not to grow crops. And this is the same thing in the United States. Farmers are being told if you do plant crops, then you're not getting any money next year. And so this is what we see. So cursing of Deuteronomy is 28 is so severe because the sins are so bad. Well, that's correct. And I mean, we have to ask ourselves the question, when you look at the woke ideology that is being promoted in the United States and is being promoted around the world, that ideology is the most perverse ideology ever developed by any group of people in the history of mankind. It's the most depraved, immoral, really disgusting, filthy, depraved ideology. And to say that people were able to come forward with that kind of ideology in the building of a society and say that inclusiveness works. I mean, I'm going to ask you, inclusiveness. Okay, so we have to include this group of people because that's loving. Do we have to include serial rapists? Is that inclusiveness? How about serial child rapists? Is that inclusive? You know, how far does our inclusion go to show that we're loving? And of course, what most people don't know is that these protocols that are being fed to you as wokeism is a direct cultural Marxist attack on the whole social order with the purposes of completely destroying it. And it's working like a champ. Okay, let's see. Let me see if we can come up with any other questions here. Okay, let's see. Yeah, disciple of Yahuah says Moses was only addressing Israel. Well, I have heard this argument. In fact, it's an argument that John Locke made. But this is an argument that I've already discussed, disciple of Yahuah, because, as I mentioned before, this is not talking to the nation, the arbitrarily named nation of Israel, modern Israel, which is a total misnomer, by the way. The nation of Israel today should never have been named Israel, because actually the nation, the kingdom, was never called Israel. During the time of David, it was called Yahud. Yahud. It was not called Israel. The northern kingdom, the breakaway kingdom following the death of Solomon, was called Yitzrael. Yitzrael. You read it in most English Bibles as Jezreel, but it was called Yitzrael, but not Israel. So the kingdom under David was called Yahud. When the kingdom was reformed under the Maccabees, it was known as the Hasmonean kingdom. And then only in modernity, with people who did not understand scripture at all, did the UN adopt the name as Israel for a discrete nation state that technically should have been named Judea. Because when the Israeli government adopted the tenet that said Israel is for Jews only, to the exclusion of the other 12 tribes, or they took on Jewish Israelism to say that all the other tribes are Jews, which is patently false. And they've gone out of the way to exclude, by the way, other nations that have been can prove that they are in fact of the tribes of Israel. They should have been called, of course, Judea, not Israel, Judea. And so the discussion from Moshe is to those of the house of Yasharel and the mixed multitude who sojourn with them. And this is why a study of Paul is a critical part of understanding Scripture, because Paul is showing you how that there is neither Greek nor Jew, neither male nor female before the cross, but that we are in the kingdom of Yahuah by our confession. And if we are baptized into Yahushua HaMashiach, then we are the seed of Abraham indeed and heirs according to the promise. The promise is the covenant given to Abraham, which became an oath unto Yitzchak, which became a law unto Yaakov, and an everlasting covenant to the seed of Yasharel. All 12 of the tribes, and the 13th and 14th tribe by adoption, and all those who sojourn with them. Sojourning with the house of Yasharel is accomplished by the words of your confession, for by your words you shall be justified, and by your words you shall be condemned. Okay, so here Kathy says, let's see, what was Kathy that said that there are numerous Ukrainians in Alberta now. Yeah, there's numerous Ukrainians actually throughout the Western world now, because you're talking millions of refugees which have left the country once we talked the Russians into invading in order to stop the intentional genocide against Russian-speaking people. Okay, Art of War showed up, French translation of a Jesuit, Jean Amiot. Chinese government to find Sun Tzu in their historical record. Yeah, maybe that's true, Chuck Deuce says, yeah. Okay. Do you have anything in mind about how far west in the US you were talking about other control? Yeah, I do, Sherry, now that you mention it. I think the Chinese are going to control. They're going to control the coast for certain. And so, and this is, pretty much, I mean, look, when the governor of Washington 8 years ago hoisted a Chinese flag above the US flag and above the state of Washington flag, he announced to the whole world that was watching that he was a Chinese agent working on behalf of the Communist Chinese Party. And he has done everything he can to allow China to make as much investment in Washington as he could. That's why the reason why you have so many homeless people on the streets in Seattle and in Portland and in San Francisco and in LA is because the price of real estate went up. And the price of real estate went up because of this EB1 protocol under the immigration law that allows Chinese to buy citizenship by making an investment of $850,000. So they come over and buy real property. They buy themselves a house, and it doesn't make any difference if it's a shack. They're going to pay $850,000 for it, and they're going to get citizenship owning that shack. They also bought up, for instance, high rises would be built like in places like Bellevue and other places. They build high-rise condos, and then Chinese investors would buy up all of the apartments at $850,000 a crack or more, and then never live in them. So you'd have a brand new building that's got 2 or 3 tenants, and the building is huge, but there's only 2 or 3 tenants in the whole building because they were being bought by people securing their citizenship. So my expectation is ultimately the Chinese are going to push back and will control jurisdictions all the way back to almost the Rocky Mountains. So there's a series of mountains there that break through. So I see the front as kind of in northern Idaho. But this is, you're going to see areas of eastern Washington, eastern Oregon, northern California, Nevada. Most of Nevada will come under Chinese control. There's going to be a competition for control, however, in Southern California up through LA, and also across through Arizona and New Mexico, because the Mexican drug cartels are already seizing control of that area. And so even though there may be governmental controls that are being handled by Chinese actors like Gavin Newsom, who's a Chinese actor, imposing, Chinese regulatory obligations on California, the street law that takes place in LA is governed by the drug cartels. The street law that takes place in Phoenix is governed by the drug cartels. The street law in Albuquerque, New Mexico, governed by the drug cartels. And they will ultimately, they'll assert complete control over that area. But otherwise, the Chinese are going to be practically all the way back to the Rockies. Okay. Yeah, now Chuck Deuce says Confucius got his name from the Jesuits. Well, Confucius, his name in the Chinese was Kung Fu Tzu. And then they came up with this idea of Confucius. Okay. All right, let's see. Okay, let me see. What else do we see here? A few Ukrainians have fled to the Promised Land. Yeah, that's true. There are quite a few Russians in the Promised Land. I can tell you that. There's many, many Russians. In fact, in Beersheba, there is a substantial Russian Orthodox church. And there are many Russians in Haifa as well. And there are many Russian Jews in Haifa, right? Okay, let's see if there's any other things. Okay. You know who has the Ruach of Yahuah because they keep his commandments, right? Notice Mexico doesn't have wildfires, but they're in hotter zones. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things that we see here that are overtaking us. And again, when we look at judgment, you look at things that cannot be mitigated. It's not like we can take a vote. Let's don't burn down any more of our forests. Let's don't burn down any of our cities. Let's have a law that says directed energy weapons can no longer be used in California. Let's have a law that says the federal government will take care to supervise our train tracks to make sure trains with hazardous waste don't come off the tracks and have a major spill, and then somebody touches them off with a match to make sure that there's a toxic cloud killing anything and everything for miles. You can pass a law, you can try to have an election, you can try to do this, that, and the other thing, but you cannot stop the judgment of Yah as Yah begins to take away the food, as Yah begins to take away the land, as Yah begins to take away your citizenship, as Yah begins to take away your sovereignty, as Yah begins to take away your leadership, to make you the tail, to make you the slave, to make you the bondservant, and then to vomit you out of the land because of the ideology of your leaders has been so deviant, so deranged, so degraded, so defiled, and so demoralized as to invoke the wrath of Yah. Okay. All right. So with that, I don't know who the Yanuka are, Lily. I'm sorry. I'm not up to speed on this stuff. Sorry about that. Okay. So with that, my friends, I want to thank you guys for joining us today on this presentation on the apocalypse of Moshe. It's something to think about because there are some current prophets that are saying the judgment that will come on America will be the worst judgment ever seen. And it says here in this apocalypse of Moshe that there are things not written in this passage that will come on you today. They'll come on you today. Well, now here's something Glenn Dibbon says, all the things I speak of today, they're upon Australia today. Okay, so before I go, Debbie Johnson says, China and Taiwan. Yes, now this is something about China and Taiwan, and I'll just say this, Debbie, because there is a very interesting vex that is taking place right now, which is that we have a nation that is so diseased. We have diseased leadership. They're deranged. They're really, sexual perverts and criminals, and they're parasites by nature. That's how they became politicians. And so you have a group of spineless parasites taking orders from a group of sexually perverse people who congregate around the idea of Satan worshiping and drinking blood, sacrificing children, and cursing the nation. These people are the ones who are making the decisions in the United States and in Western Europe and in Canada and in Australia and in New Zealand. And these people now have pushed themselves into a self-destruct methodology that's going to bring us into a war. Now, everyone in the U.S. military department knows that the United States is incapable of fighting a war on two fronts, like we did during World War II, where we fought both in Europe and in the Pacific theater. We had help in fighting in Europe, however, because the lion's share of the battle in Europe was undertaken by Russia, who lost 16.5 million men, destroying Germany along the Russian front for 5 years before we entered into the war on D-Day. And so the two-front war that we fought in Europe in World War II was primarily us fighting against Japan in the Pacific theater. Now, with that being said, the Pacific theater is protected by, of course, America's naval prowess, which we used to be the most superior navy in the world by a long shot using our aircraft carriers. The Chinese have spent the last 30 years developing technologies to sink all of our aircraft carriers. That was their fundamental goal. And they just ran a simulation of sinking our aircraft carriers as we come near the China Sea. And they successfully demonstrated that they could sink 3 of our carriers with very little collateral damage to China and massive losses to the United States. And China is playing this very, very well. They have a willing ally in North Korea. North Korea is, of course, slightly unglued in that North Korea has no problems launching ICBMs over Japan on a regular basis. When one of them comes down into a major population center in Japan, well, then I guess the war will be on. But there's not going to be any stopping it before it does. And the North Korean military is formidable. When you're talking about ground warfare, like you see in Ukraine, where people are fighting in ditches, when you see ground warfare come, the North Korean military is going to be a formidable adversary. Millions of troops pouring over the border into South Korea, where we currently have about 30,000 US troops joining with other Korean forces. The situation in Taiwan, Taiwan has recently requested to come under the American nuclear umbrella. Now, what this means is that Taiwan is saying, look, we want assurances from the United States that should China invade Taiwan, that we will use nuclear weapons against China. The United States will use nuclear weapons against China. This kind of a situation is absolutely a complete breach of the understanding, because the United States and China have played a long game saying that we've got a limited autonomy in Taiwan, but that Taiwan has always been a part of China. To say that the Taiwanese government is saying, well, thank you, Debbie, to saying that the Taiwanese government is going to now come into the American nuclear umbrella is a complete severance of Taiwan from China, which will cause China to make a military move against Taiwan. Now, China is in a situation right now where they're biding their time because they want to see all of the American arms that are currently being used in Ukraine and are being shown to be really hopelessly obsolete weapon systems, like the Patriot systems, like the HIMARS, and some of the other things like the Abrams tanks, like the howitzers that we placed in Ukraine, most of which have been blown up and have had very little effect in the war. You can see that the Chinese are waiting to see how much of our armament we will waste in Ukraine that the Russians can destroy before they're going to move against Taiwan. Now, the way it stands right now, we're many, many weapon systems we no longer have replacement for. For instance, we don't have Javelin missiles anymore. They're all gone. And as we get to this farther and farther down the road here, pumping and dumping all of our armament into Ukraine, the Chinese can look and say, gee, I wonder how long they can actually fight against us, particularly if we sink 3 of their aircraft carriers in the opening salvo. The Americans no longer have the industrial base to even rebuild those carriers like we did in World War II, because we gave all that industry to China. So the thing is, the Chinese are not going to move on Taiwan until they're absolutely assured they're going to win. And they're very close to that assurance right now, because the United States is about to be headlong into a direct confrontation with Russia, very likely to begin on June 12th. When the United States puts 200 aircraft over Eastern Europe in what appears to be the launching of an air campaign to close the skies over Ukraine with NATO aircraft in order for the Ukrainians to launch their so-called counteroffensive. When NATO planes enter in the skies over Ukraine, they're going to be blown out of the sky by Russian anti-aircraft systems, which is going to be hard proof that NATO itself is at war with Russia. And once that's proved and understood, the Russians will be taking the war directly to the doorstep of those NATO nations. You might want to keep in mind that Russia already has some 381 short-range ballistic nuclear missiles targeted for all 381 NATO designated sites. That is to say, every NATO base, every supply depot, every armament, every port. They're already pre-targeted and waiting for the push of one button. And in Europe, they'll arrive in less than 3 minutes. Okay. Have I ever considered reading the whole Bible? You should. You're very good at it. Well, I'll tell you, I got to tell you, look up now. I have tried to read the whole thing. I can't tell you how many times. And I get so far into it. And I have to tell you, when I read the whole of Scripture, the difficulty with reading all of it is that you can maintain concentration for maybe 4 or 5 chapters before you start to lose it, you know? And so I've got many audio files. I've just never been able to get it finished, but I thank you. Okay, so Nadria, let us pray together, warriors of Yahuah. Yeah, hallelujah. And I want to say this too for the warriors of Yahuah. When we lift up Scripture in the public square, we attack the dragon. And so all of you who are out lifting Scripture and raising the name of Yahuah, you're dragon slayers. And may you be empowered as a dragon slayer. May your sword be sharp. May your shield be strong. May your helmet be secure. May Yah protect you and cover you in your walking into the cave of the dragon. And may your slaying of the dragon be quite successful. Okay. All right. Thank you, brothers and sisters. And I hope you will come back and see us next week. We'll be talking about yet another apocalypse found in Scripture. Blessings to you in the name of Yahuah Elohaykem. Okay, we'll see you later.